Welcome to the South Burlington School Board meeting. And I will open up the meeting with any comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda. Wow, hello.
Phew, just made it. So I'm Erin Sutherland, and I think some of you may have gotten my email. So I have a couple kids at Central School, and I'm having some concerns about the busing. And I don't know if this is something that people are already kind of aware of, but our bus typically comes at about 2:57 to 3 o'clock, and it's been coming anywhere to 3:15, 3:25, even close to 3:30. And so, sorry, I just like rushing.
Yeah, take your time.
So my concern is that, why is this happening? So I talked to Deb at Transportation. She was very lovely, and it's 3 reasons. One is the lack of drivers, which is a problem, and everyone's trying to get more drivers. And 2, we have a lot of drivers out on medical leave. 3, we are making athletics a priority, and that's unfortunate. So she has to give the buses up to them when they call, and they don't often call until much later in the day, and so she has no authority or anything to be able to say, actually, no, sorry, you're gonna have to wait till 3:10 or 3:15 when the youngest learners are brought home. So last week there were 7 times that happened, and it impacted my route every time. So there's no way for Deb to communicate that to the parents, and then it's trickling down to the secretaries are doing a lot of work to make sure that 5-year-olds are getting on the appropriate bus. So filling out these little papers, handing them all out. The teachers I know at Orchard are the ones that are responsible for that. And I'm just curious as to why this is happening and how we can fix this going forward so that there is a way for you to know when your child is going to get home. I am lucky enough to be home, but my kids do have other things after school, and so we're missing Stern Center time because I don't know when the bus is coming. And so I also am not one to really want to call the secretaries every day and be like, is today a bus switch? Because I can come and pick them up. So I just don't know if that's something that everybody is aware of, but that is something that's happening and pretty frustrating for the parents and definitely the secretaries.
Well, thanks, Erin.
Yeah.
I know I got a note from a resident, not identifiable, but that indicated there was a bus issue that was more of a traffic-related safety issue as well, and I did forward that on to the appropriate staff.
Okay.
Gary, I don't want to put you on the spot, but
I can address.
if I could invite Gary up, and this may require more follow-up, Erin, that really, but Gary ultimately has the responsibility.
Thank you.
And I know,
Yep.
yeah, again, if there's things you need to follow up on at a future,
Absolutely. I
That's
think we
fine.
talked on the phone. Did we talk on the phone once, Aaron?
I haven't talked
Oh, okay, so
to Deb, but
I'm
I remember
the,
my neighbors.
I'm the operations director, and some of what you said is absolutely accurate. We have had some drivers on medical leave. We increased 1 driver in our budgeted resources this year, and we had a driver that we had to replace. So it took a little time, but we have 1 of those drivers filled right now. Just as soon as the CDL endorsement is complete, which should be within a week or so, we'll have an additional driver. We have advertised for our final and vacant position, the one that we added to the budget. So that should alleviate a little bit of that concern. So the concern about athletics, that's a little different perspective than what I'm getting in the collaboration between transportation and athletics. One day last week, we had a couple of extra trips that we actually canceled an athletic trip and coordinated with Burlington to have Burlington pick up one of our athletic trips. So the trips are not prioritized ahead of student transportation, but if there is a way that we can support both, we try to. The inconvenience of, 15 or 20 minutes, I know is real for a parent. I've got some kids home myself, so I know that that can throw schedules off, and I'll take a look at that with Deb a little more closely to have her make me aware of how many times that it's happening. We did have a bus breakdown last week. I'm sure that might have been one of those days where if it was more than 20 minutes, that was absolutely the case, because it threw afternoon transportation really off kilter. Because we had to replace a bus and shuttle the driver to that bus, and it ended up costing us about 30 minutes. But we are aware of the issues.
Because I didn't know if there was a way where, like at other districts, I know the parents are responsible for driving their kids to some of these athletic events, which is completely inconvenient, I would understand. But I just, if it's 10 or 15 minutes, I've never called. But when it was 30 plus minutes twice, I was starting to kind of wonder, because we did miss our next thing we had to go to. And so I know also, I think, the drivers do realize that if someone stays on the bus or is on the wrong bus, you still complete that route first.
Yeah.
Because I think that was one of the days too, was that a child was on the wrong bus and then they went back to the school and then completed the route. So I know it's a couple different things, but I just thank you for looking into it and
Okay,
hopefully.
all right, thanks for sharing the concern.
Can I also, I don't want to pile in because it wasn't even on our agenda, but one question is, I think a little bit of it is communication. Some of it is definitely the actual timing of it and the actual combining of buses. And, I've heard the announcements when I've been in the school about, bus 19 is now going to be combined with, such and such bus. But part of it is the communications with the parents. And this is something, just as a parent, not even as a board member, I've had an issue with since my kids started going to school here, is that sometimes if there is communication at all, it comes through email, and parents rushing around between that hour of 2 and 3 o'clock when we're trying to get last minute things done. It's hard to know. So my question is whether there's a simple solution of like a text message system or a resource like that might not cost too much money, but might actually just improve the lives of parents. If there's an easy way for Deb to reach out at 1:30 or 2 and say, look, this is what's going to happen. So you can either pick your kid up or they're going to be 20 minutes late. That would solve a lot of problems probably for people, even if we can't really change how the buses are going right now.
The answer to your question is yes. There are plenty of software solutions out there with those kind of capabilities.
Yeah.
The longer answer is we don't own any of those capabilities at this point. From the analysis that I've done, we are one of the more traditionally operated transportation systems that I know of in the county. And it's something that we are going to explore with the transportation director. But I don't see that as an immediate potential capability. Because the software systems that I have experience with, they do take, months usually to implement.
Well, I can imagine you would have to have parents sign up and there would be some complications with all of that. I just wonder if there's an interim solution, because if there is, perhaps, I don't know if Deb can really answer the questions of parents, if there is a certain, these are the routes that we're having challenges with, and, if maybe somebody that people can call to get an answer at a certain time, like a cutoff time during the day that says this is what we're expecting for the afternoon or something, because it's just really hard to plan, but.
I don't know, maybe, I know like this elementary schools are getting like Twitters and stuff, which I don't know how to do yet, but I mean, that could be an option. I don't know, I just feel like there's something where you can have a notification or an email go out, or, I know the email isn't ideal at all, but I mean, just something in the interim until we can find a better way, because I just think, I'm one person here, but like, there's a lot of moms that are so frustrated, and then I just don't want it to keep happening, I guess, if possible.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Erin, for bringing up the issue. Thanks, Gary, for
Thank
being willing to
you.
respond. And I just encourage you to continue the dialogue, and I'm confident that it will work itself out. But I think you brought a good issue up today, so thanks. Any other comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. Any amendments to the agenda? All right, we'll move on. I know Arnell sent me a late email today that he was not able to make the meeting this evening. And the one announcement he wanted to make was that there have been a couple of juniors who have applied for the student board representatives. So at this point, we are working to schedule interviews with Bridget and myself sometime in the next week or so. So that will be the next step. And we're thrilled to have some interest in this student school board role. Any other announcements?
Yes,
Alex?
Elizabeth, my third time announcing it. The Howard Center's Fall Community Education Series on November 1st is having the Commissioner of Health, Mark Levine, give a talk at the dealer.com facility. It's entitled Vaping, E-Cigarettes, and JUL, The Facts Behind the Smokescreen. I know that there's been some difficulty with this emerging epidemic in our high school, and I see you nodding your head, Noah, so I appreciate the empathy or perhaps it's support, I don't know, but I appreciate it.
Hopefully both.
I'm going to attend it. I hope that anybody else in South Burlington who's concerned about this epidemic will also attend. If not, I will certainly bring what I learned there to our first November board meeting as well, and I'm going to ask that our agenda for November 7th, I believe, includes a little bit of time for me to do that. And while I'm on the subject, I want to talk about the title of this talk, which is the subtitle, "The Facts Behind the Smokescreen." And one thing that I think was a smokescreen that was brought up a few years ago was when the legislature was debating whether to raise the age to buy vapes and cigarettes from 18 to 21. Governor Peter Shumlin said that he think that should not be done because he believed that vaping was a way for people to quit smoking cigarettes. There's been a lot of literature saying that that is absolutely false. So vaping is not a substitute or a way to get off cigarettes or to get off nicotine addiction. It is just a different way to consume nicotine. And that's part of the smokescreen. And if it is occurring, or if people at the highest levels of our state government believe it, that's another problem that needs to be addressed as well. So my opinion is out there, and you know what I think of Peter Shumlin now. So thank you very much.
Thanks for the announcement. Any other announcements? All right, seeing none, we will move on to agenda item 6, which is city and school collaboration. And in David's absence, I believe we have a meeting scheduled with Kevin Dorn and Helen Reilly in the next couple of weeks. I know I have it on my calendar. I won't look it up right now, but we're kind of reinvigorating those. And we do have the public warning meeting on the ballot items, which is scheduled for November 5th in the evening at 7 p.m. So the city council and the school board will be in attendance at that meeting to respond to questions for ballot items that will be on the November 6th ballot, largely regarding City Center and the land exchange proposal. Anything else on city-school collaboration? All right, we'll move on to agenda item 7, update on negotiations. Bridget, do you want to give an update?
Sure, just a brief update. We have scheduled our first meeting with SBEA, the teachers union, for October 24th at 6 p.m. So we hope to have a good, productive session to talk about ground rules for negotiations and just how we'll move forward. And then we've presented a list of other potential dates from our end, so we hope at that meeting to kind of nail some of those dates down. And then on the support staff, not a lot to report other than we have sent a letter saying that we intend to negotiate for a new agreement. And so we're waiting to hear back from them about some potential dates to open those negotiations too.
Great. Anything else? Any other board members? All right, we'll move on to agenda item 8. And this is, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Love that ring. It came in really handy as an decline last week. No, actually, I did not use that because it's illegal to use electronic calls. I thought I had that turned off.
So just one item to report tonight. Mike Martin and David Young have a letter that's going to go out to all families around the SBAC results that have been released. So we wanted to make sure you're aware of that letter that's going to go out in terms of the performance. So each family will receive this letter with the district's percentages and also their child's score report. And they're also including just some facts about the Smarter Ballot assessment and its adaptive qualities. So didn't know if you had any questions.
I guess we're all just reading the results,
Yeah.
because we've been asking about them, and I think this is the
And
first
I-
even overview that we've seen.
Yeah, and it's been delayed from the agency because they're trying to make sure that everything's accurate. So that's why it's been a while for us to get it. And then Mike's gonna do a full report when he does his ends report on the academic proficiency, so I'll have that information for you guys when that report's due to you.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised because there was a Vermont Digger article this week that I read that was talking about SBAC results, and they had implied in the article that they weren't going to be fully released, that the districts had them, but they weren't going to be let out of embargo until December, because they're putting together some new dashboard or something at the state level. So I had heard last week that we were going to be getting them very, very soon, and then I had read that article and thought, oh no, is it really going to be December? So it's good
And I think
that
most
people
districts
are-
have just decided to get the information out.
Okay,
So that's what we're doing, is we're getting information out to parents.
great.
Yeah.
And is this, I think I recall, are parent-teacher conferences?
Parent-teacher
Coming up.
conferences
The
are
week
in November.
The week of Thanksgiving.
Yeah, Thanksgiving week.
Okay,
Yeah.
so these data will be available
Yeah,
to parents?
they'll have them well before those, yeah.
Right. Any other board
That-
questions? Or Joanne, did you want to add to that? So do you happen to know when the,
I don't know when that ends report is going to you guys. It's on your calendar, your ends
Yeah.
calendar.
I had a note, as I went back to my agenda from last time that I had scribbled some notes on as I was preparing for this meeting, that I think Mike had said December, maybe potentially
Okay.
early December,
Yeah.
about that. I think that might be when the ends policy comes back.
Okay.
all right, any other comments from the public? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 9, master planning and visioning.
So- You can, go ahead. Did you get the-
David had put together or not? Okay,
Just from John.
okay.
You have the same
Go
thing?
for it. Yeah, go for it.
Does everyone have this in front of them?
You can go ahead and report that if you want. You've been more involved in it than I have.
I was
I've
going
only
to say,
been at one
I have
meeting.
to say, I haven't really looked at this so much, because it
So then I can
was.
talk about it.
Yeah.
So really, the district webpage, we wanted to let you know that the master planning and visioning, it has the details about the work group meetings held with Dor Whittier, as well as the handouts that'll be provided for the school board meetings, everything since the early September. So they're going to continue to update that, so all the information will be updated on the, right on the the head district webpage, the main page. This last Friday, they had a principals workshop, and you were there, Bridget, for that, I think.
I was. I
Yeah.
was there for most of the day. I did not get to stay all the way through the middle school. So I got all the way through the high school and
Yeah.
about half of the time for the middle school. And then, some other working group folks were there to take notes.
Yeah,
and-
so they really had teachers and the administrators, and they did tours of the building. Mike Martin was a part of that, just to talk with the design team and the working group about what they think their needs are for the learning environments.
And I should say, it doesn't really say it in here. I guess it does say 2 students participated. At the high school, the students were excellent. They were great. They were really involved. They actually ended up giving most of the tour, which was great to see it from a student's perspective
Yeah.
about this is my pathway here and there through the building, and, this is what we think. And it was really great to have the students have that sort of release from their regular responsibilities to be there with us. That was
Yeah.
very helpful.
That's good. And then there's a visioning committee interactive workshop on November 7th. Is this in everyone's packet, the visioning
Yes,
committee?
yeah.
So we're looking for, there's still some spaces in this. So if you're interested, you can email or call David. It'll be a full-day workshop with questions from the design team, and looks like lunch is provided, so, at Trader Duke's.
And that's going to be clear as well, that is going to include faculty and then some administrators and some students, and then members of the community and parents. And so we're looking for a group of approximately 80 people. And so there is an application to send in, just to make sure that there's kind of a balance of different perspectives at that meeting. And so those should be sent right to David Young's email address. And then David and his assistant will sort through them and talk to the planning committee about just finalizing who's going to be on that
And
session.
Bridget, can you clarify who will facilitate that work?
Doran Whittier is. So Doran Whittier has on the team that's been working with us as a working group, 2 former educators who are now on the Doran Whittier staff. One was a middle school teacher for something like 17 years, and literally this is his first year out of teaching and into Doran Whittier. And then the other gentleman has been with Doran Whittier longer and been on the architecture side for longer, but was also a teacher at the high school level, I believe. And so they will be facilitating that along with Rob Fitzgerald and a couple of the other people from Doran Whittier who we've worked with in the past. So they asked really good questions at the principals forum, so I'm hoping that they can really frame that day in a very good way to draw out different, it's going to be small tables. We're going to try to mix up people so we get different perspectives at each table to try to get kind of a pretty rich discussion going, and then share those results with the other people who are in the room, and sort of have that as the basis really for getting going on what design options might look like.
And then the last thing on the update is they're planning some off-site visits to other schools. So Dora Whittier is setting up an agenda to visit some schools they've built or added onto in Massachusetts, and the dates for those tours are November 13th and 14th. I'm not exactly, I guess 15 people, I'm not exactly sure who's going on those trips. Do you know?
And the truth is, it's a little bit, we can't, basically the working group is big enough between administrators and school board members and all of that. I think we're still working that out, frankly, how many spaces are going to be.
Yeah.
But we do want some community members, and then I think we'll have to narrow that down, though, to people that get invited to go on that, because it's such a small group. We just don't want to overwhelm the schools who are taking us in, especially, frankly, Shelburne, because Doran Whittier redid a wing of their middle school, and
I think they're planning on doing that after school hours to do a visit to that one, so.
I think that's true for Shelburne. The ones in Massachusetts, though, they're just worried about wearying people or disrupting their day by having too many people there at one time. But yeah, that November 13th and 14th would be an overnight, so it would be driving down there, doing tours all day the 13th, and then overnight, and then tours on the 14th and back. Because frankly, there's been a lot more school construction in Massachusetts in the last few years because there's more funding for it from the state level than in Vermont. So a lot of the more innovative stuff, both on the renovation side and on the new construction side, has been in Massachusetts. So we kind of have to go there to kind of see what's been going on, really. So
Great.
that's where we are.
Anything else on that, Bridget? Because I really haven't been that much.
The only thing is that we're starting to get information about where our enrollment actually is for this year, and how that compares to the demographer's projections, and we're sort of pushing that information back out to the demographer to update again, because we really need to, as we're going through this process, have the latest, potential demographics. His model is pretty much spot on across the district, with the exception of Orchard, which had about 24 kids fewer than we were expecting this year. And there's been a lot of talk in the working group about why that might be, but nobody knows exactly. Nobody's pinpointed exactly where those students went. But he was very, very close on the other elementary schools and on the middle school and high school to within just, 1 or 2 students even on some of the schools. So that was positive, because there was a gap in previous years. And I think sort of the reconfiguration, a little bit of the model, some additions to his algorithm have sort of helped get us a little bit closer to what we need to know. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it on what's going on.
And just a quick question, do board members know right now that if you'll be participating in the November 7th workshop? I am planning on it.
I just wrote it down just now. So.
Okay.
I will be there, yes.
Okay, so at a minimum, whatever Steve and Alex you decide on your schedules, we'll warn it.
I'm afraid, yeah, you can, I would warn it, but I would also warn that I cannot attend.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, it was interesting. We pushed back a little, I pushed back a little bit because I said, well, why are we doing it during the week if it's an all-day thing? And we want community members and other people. And the architects said they've actually had better luck during the week getting people to take a day off from work to go be part of something like this than getting people to cancel weekend plans that include things like soccer games and birthday parties and things that are not movable. So they said they actually tend to get better participation when it's during the week, although that is challenging, obviously, for a lot of reasons. So that's that.
Okay. Anything else from the community on master planning and visioning? All right, seeing nothing, we'll move on. We can't tell David we're doing so well without him, so. Yes, we can. We say that of anyone who's missing, though, you know. All right, agenda item 10 is policy work. This is warned for action. This is on policy F11, student freedom of expression in school-sponsored media. This is a third reading. And I think everyone has a revised copy, and I think changes that came out of the last meeting are highlighted in yellow. Any additional feedback?
So I have one minor item, but I don't think it holds us up from, the last paragraph, there's actually a couple problems with it. It's not really parallel, but I'll accept that. But we need to add an apostrophe S after advisor. Media advisor is refusing. And with that, I would move that we adopt this policy with that one change.
Second.
Further discussion? Yes, sir.
Actually, I had an apostrophe in that last paragraph. I think students exercising their plural actually should be as apostrophe.
Well, the thing is,
Or
I thought about that.
what you can do is strike the word the and just take the apostrophe out for students exercising their right, because it's plural with their.
Yeah, I went back and forth on whether that there was plural or whether we're using it in the sense of replacing he, she, you know, since we've gone to plural pronouns in a lot of places to reflect that we're being gender neutral. So I had thought the same thing, Mike, when I first read it and thought that needs to be changed. But yeah, I'm okay either way.
So,
To do the least harm for this third reading, just having the apostrophe S. I understand where Mike's coming from, but I don't think we lose anything.
striking the, though?
No, just, I would keep it as, it reads singular throughout that, except that there does kind of throw a little bit of a, for old school, that is. Nothing against you, Mike, and old school. I'm still old school on pronouns as well. I'm working on it. My kids are working hard on me, and I'm getting there. But in any event, I think just having the apostrophe S after advisor does the least for this third reading, that wouldn't have to bring it back.
Okay.
They say it doesn't matter. It matters. It happens in real life.
It does. It does.
All right, we have a motion and a second, and we have had discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, and the motion carries. All right, we'll move on to agenda item 11, executive limitations policy. This is also warned for action, 2.5, financial planning and budgeting. Amity.
Hello again. I feel like I was just here doing this. So I would look to you again as to how you want to go through this. Last time I read briefly some of the interpretations or the evidence, and if you had questions, is that still your?
So let me just confirm, is this a third reading on this one as well?
No, this is number one.
And we don't do this because of that, okay. I just wanted to confirm that. Okay, and is it the board's pleasure then that we'll just have you go through and look at any substantive changes that have been made?
Well, the
So-
only other question I had about this, with David not being here, is I think, Amity, you said you're sort of ready to present evidence. I had a couple of questions about interpretation, and those are more, I
Right.
think those are more David questions.
Sure.
And so we already have it on the proposed agenda for November 7th to come back. So I'm wondering if we should talk about evidence and some of those detailed numbers and save the discussion about interpretation and all of that, maybe for when David is back?
Well, why don't we have the full discussion and
Okay.
then maybe table action?
Okay.
And if
I
we
would just
need-
feel, I would just feel better if we sort of knew from the outset that perhaps we're not going to act on it tonight, because I think the urge to get every single detail right tonight, it might not be productive without David sort of
Yeah.
being here, yeah.
If you have questions on the interpretation, you want me to bring them to
Yes,
him,
I think
can.
that would be
Okay.
great. I think that would be super helpful, but yeah, it just, yeah.
All right, so why don't we start, do we want to start with the evidence first then? Or do you want to just
Well,
go
I think
through
we
it
should
in
just go through it
chronological?
then. We'll just go
Okay.
through it in chronological order, and you can just take questions, Joanne, and just table, we'll just table them, you can write them down or whatever, and then we'll just bring it back, and then we can talk about the actual evidence. So maybe Amity doesn't have to represent the evidence next time if we can
Okay.
get comfortable with the interpretation.
So should we start with detail policies then?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're on detail policy 1.
So this is risk incurring those situations or conditions described as unacceptable in the board policy, financial condition, and activities. And the interpretation, I interpret this to mean that I have financial plans in place that minimize risk to the most reasonable extent possible. I will also implement corrective actions described in any state or federal audit, independent financial audit, or the monitoring report 2.4 financial condition and activities. And so, briefly, I would just summarize some of these evidence pieces, since I don't know if you've had the opportunity to go through this report. It did kind of get to you a little later than I had hoped, but, for the first evidence, the purchasing, that we follow the bidding process, and the listing of the attached items that we put to bid during FY17 is as an exhibit number 1. And also, it lists the items that went to bid during the fiscal year 2018. So this report actually tended to be in May of each year, and I don't believe it was ever presented to you in May. So I'm feeling a little behind schedule, but yet it's kind of also the opportunity, since it's before the budget season too, to talk about this. The second paragraph is the reserve funds that we established during the 2017 fiscal year are still sitting in wait in case we need them for an emergency situation. So those have not changed. We haven't added to that, but we also have not utilized that. The auditor's opinion of financial statements, our audit was completed for 2017 in October of 2017. And there were no findings, and we had a positive ending fund balance, which is explained below in the little chart. And then also as exhibits attached to this report as well. There's more details. Then, there's some explanations about the general fund balance and the capital project fund balances that are shown in this exhibit. And then also, or they are attached, in the exhibits 2A. And we also have the fund balance listed for our enterprise funds, which is nutritional services, schools out, and the Munson Fields, and there's just one small other fund that we have. And we monitor those enterprise funds closely and work with those program managers just to continue to see positive results that are showing here. The pension fund is it's seen some positive growth. We can thank the market for that. Some years is not always positive. The actual percentage increase that's listed here is, it says 11% over the prior year, but we discovered that when putting this report together, that number didn't get changed from the last report. So the real number is 12.9% growth, so it's actually a better growth. So we'll correct that when we do the second reading. On the next page, the summary of our outstanding debt. This talks about our bonds and our leases that are out and issued during the fiscal year. So this summarizes the debts, and they're attached on Exhibit 2D also. And just a note of the leases, netted additional leases in 2017 were 547,000 that were for one-to-one computers, a projection system in the auditorium, a toolcat for our maintenance department, and a school bus. And for the capital assets is just listed here, the inventory, and it's also as part of Exhibit 2E. And there's a table that's pulled from our audit talking about our federal grant awards and that we were in compliance and there was no findings. And the absence of a management letter from the auditors indicates that there were no findings in FY17. So we reported compliance. Any questions?
I've not seen that before, where the way you just phrased it, to me, might be a better way to phrase it, because this one says the auditors did not include a management letter.
Correct.
And I've actually never seen an audit that doesn't have a management letter with
And
no findings.
Ironically, the last fiscal year audit in 16 had no management letter attached.
Do the auditors commit to us that the reason they're not supplying a management letter is because there were no findings?
I don't have the answer to that question. I could ask that. They're actually going to be arriving on Monday, so I will ask that question.
Yeah, I mean, my preference would be to have that language
Okay.
versus they didn't include a management
Okay,
letter.
okay.
Because I've just not seen that practice before.
Okay.
I had a couple questions about the numbers. I was confused about how, for example, our capital reserve fund, where it falls in these different funds that are here in the table, because we funded that it was 300,000, right? And we haven't funded it since then. And I was trying to sort of just understand where that was.
I believe, well, let's see. So on Exhibit 2A, which has page 10 listed at the bottom, because that's the page number from the audit. You'll see there's kind of three sections to these fund balances. So the first section is our general fund at $1,065,828. Then the capital projects fund is not the capital reserve. That's the major capital projects from bonds, that kind of project. But down at the bottom, the non-major funds, there's a last section that says capital projects fund, which I don't like how they termed that, and I think we had them adjust that in the 18 audit to have a different name, because it's super confusing when you see it here in the middle, and then not including that 300,000 in that same term, you know? So I can't remember the name of it in 18, but I will reference that, but that is where it shows, is
So
in
that's
this
in other
non-major fund.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
So is that in other, so that must be in the general fund?
It is not in the general fund, it's considered other governmental funds.
Okay. But then I was confused about why, okay, because we approved that okay, I'm now getting confused about which year we're talking about as well, because now we're out past the end of the 2018
Yes,
fiscal year, but we're still
correct.
talking about 2017.
17,
Okay.
yes, correct. It will look
Okay.
similar because that number hasn't changed in the FY18 audit, which we won't actually see the hard copy of that for a while, but
Right.
it will be similar, except I think titled a little differently.
Okay, so most of that 408,000 increase in other governmental
Right,
funds
is
was
that
the 300,000
correct.
capital reserve that we
You
put in
have
there.
that right,
Okay.
yes.
And then the other question I had is, and I must confess, I did not have time to go back and sort of marry this up with 2.4, which we just talked about. And I was so, as you know, it's on tape, I was so confused about that ending fund balance, the general fund balance, and what was able to be carried into the next budgeting cycle that we're just getting started.
Right.
And this number seems so much higher than what we were talking about. Am I confused again?
Well, again, I was reporting in 2.4 on fiscal year 18.
Okay.
This is fiscal year 17.
Got
So
it.
this feels very backwards, and that's why I said it's kind of hard to be reporting this report now, because it really should have been done earlier. but-
Well, and that's what's confusing though too, because
Yeah.
I used to get a different answer when I was asked this question, because I was always told that we were supposed to be looking 2 years back, because how could you be looking at the previous
Right.
year when it wasn't even really,
Right, and we don't commit in the 18, in FY 18, whatever we end that year with doesn't get committed until FY 20.
right, okay.
So when you commit in 18, it's actually 16's fund balance committed amount. So that 516,901, that was actually not the exact amount that was committed.
Yep.
It was different, but that's why you see on the same Exhibit 2A, the 553,435.
Yep.
That was budgeted as a committed carry forward of, prior year unexpended fund balance.
Okay, I'm getting it now, thank you.
Quick question,
Yes.
Amity, on the capital reserve, is that not in an interest-bearing?
It sits with our cash, so that is an interest-bearing account, yes. But it is accounted for in a separate fund
Okay.
on our accounting ledger, but it is sitting in an account, in our general operating account with interest-bearing, yes.
So over time, we wouldn't show that reserve getting interest on its own?
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
All right.
So, a question, this may not be the place for this in here, but with the pension trust fund, I see the contributions, and for our information, and again, I'm not sure this is the right report for it, but it would be interesting to understand what our, I guess we could call them contributions as well, for the defined contribution, because we have,
Right.
there was a grandfather a few years ago, and I'd like to
Right.
understand how that's growing over time.
Sure,
And I
okay.
don't know if that,
Yeah,
this
that
might be,
doesn't
this
get,
might be a nice place for it, just to
Sure.
see, here's what we're contributing to our defined benefit
Okay.
ongoing fund.
sure,
I
yeah.
don't know if the rest of the board agrees, but that, I think that might be an interesting piece of information.
We could actually provide a quarterly report. They're really well written and easy to read. For that fund.
Yeah, I don't know if we necessarily need it that often, it's just that when I see
Here would
what
be
we're
a, yeah,
contributing to pensions, that's part of it,
Mhm.
though it's
right. It's
obviously
not the
very
defined
different.
benefit, but it is also part of our pensions, correct? Yep.
Anything else on detailed policy one?
Did you have any questions for David about that?
Not on that one, no.
Okay.
All right, so why don't we move to detailed policy 2?
Omit credit, the detail policy is omit credible projection of revenue and expenses, separation of capital and operational items, cash flow, disclosure of planning assumptions, and predicted financial impact. So we interpret that to be incredible protections to mean that revenue and expense projections are based on both historical trends and plans for the budget year. At the end of the year, the reason for significant differences is used to make improvements and management decisions for the following year. I interpret separation of capital and operational items to mean an ongoing stewardship plan to maintain facilities and a separate documentation of any major capital construction or purchases requiring funding outside the regular budget. I interpret cash flow to mean the an anticipation of board approval to borrow funds to bridge gaps between cash needs and the receipt of tax and other revenues. I interpret disclosure of planning and assumptions to mean that details and reasons about the impact of the budget on the educational program and the variables related to tax and financial actions are shared with the board and community. I interpret predicted financial impact to mean the anticipated residential tax rate of the proposed budget and the listing of the tax rate variables not controlled by the school district, as well as the long-term implications of financial and staffing commitments. Whew, that's a lot.
I did have just two small things. In the sentence that starts with, I interpret separation of capital and operational items, I think it would just be clear if we're saying the interpretation is that an ongoing stewardship plan to maintain facilities and a separate documentation of any major capital construction or purchase requiring funding outside the operational budget, because it is part of the regular budget, but we're talking about the separation of those two things, so outside the operational budget. And I think this sentence about cash flow is confusing, because we're still talking, really the policy is still talking about projecting what cash flow looks like, so we can anticipate those needs. This sentence is just kind of awkward, because it sort of says, we're just assuming that the board is going to approve notes if we run into that issue, but it doesn't really speak to, I don't think, actually projecting what cash flow looks like, so that we have a sense of, oh, in August, we may be in a position where we're going to need that board approval. It's just awkwardly worded. I don't think it necessarily changes. I mean, I think I can understand it, but it's just awkwardly written in this one. So that was one of the questions that I had for David, was whether that needs tweaking a little bit to really just reflect that he's projecting cash flows. And the rest of it I was okay with for this detailed policy.
Anything else on interpretation? All right, move to evidence.
Okay. So the first section is again talking about the general fund budget versus actuals. And the figures came out extremely close with, a net overall difference of less than 1%, with the underestimating our revenues, and a slight over expenses on our budgeted expenses came out to like a net of less than 1%, so. The next section talks about our budget book, and the requirements from the city charter are listed here, which is kind of helpful when we were discussing our budget book and changes that we may do. And so this just talks about what we put into the budget book, and then how we project our expenses, obviously with employment contracts and where they're settled, and if they are settled, and they were in this budget year, FY17. And the next section talks about our separation of the capital and operational items, and it shows the list of the bond and the projects that were within that bond. And it talks about how the budget of each project within the bond and where we expended the funds. And overall, we are under budget, and there will still be a little bit of bond money that is able to be expended on approved project. And there was an overage a fairly large overage with the Munson track and field, mostly because we had some change orders on the moving of the shot put and the pole vault outside of the track and field area for safety reasons, as well as a new layer of asphalt had to be laid under before they could put the track in order to not void a warranty. The next section on cash flow. In the FY17 fiscal year, there was no need to borrow for cash, so there's no tax flow statement attached here. We do monitor that every month, and then with the forecast of what our payables and our payroll are, and so we were able to go the full year without an anticipation note, which was quite nice. And then the planning assumptions, we talk about, how we report to the electorate on the budget, and that we had a minimal increase in staffing in FY18, or in the 19 budget over the 18 actual. And we had the bond of $950,500 that was approved. And predicting of the financial impact, we used the budget workshop sheet to present the tax rate, which is actually attached as Exhibit 4 in the section in the back. So David reported compliance in the areas of the revenue and expense projections and the separation of the capital versus operational items, as well as cash flow and planning assumptions. Any questions?
Comments on evidence?
It's a minor comment, but I would just say that Section 5, the disclosure of the planning assumptions, could be beefed up a little bit, because it makes it sound like we kind of just look at the contracts and the stewardship plan, and then those are our planning assumptions. It doesn't really, it could add a sentence or two or three about some of the other things that we look at, like forecasted enrollment and all of that. It really should, I think, address some of the other major assumptions that go into planning
Okay.
the budget.
Okay.
Doesn't have to be 2 pages long, but it would just be good to make it sound like we look at more than just the staff contracts
Right.
and the stewardship.
Okay.
Anything else? All right, we'll move on to detail policy 3.
Okay. Detail policy 3 is to provide less for board prerogatives during the year than is set forth in the governance investment policy. And the interpretation is, they interpret this to mean that the budget contains the level of resources requested by the board for its operations and professional development. And so attached is the actual detail of the budget by line for the school board and for the legal services. And it shows the adopted budget in fiscal year 17 with actual expenses, and then the 18 budget with those actual expenses, and then the approved of 19 budget. So it's comparing all those years together. And each year, the level of spending has come in under budget, and actually in the FY19 budget, the total budget for the school board was reduced, so. We have compliance. Any questions on these numbers? These numbers are terribly small. To read, I'm thinking, oh, boy.
All right, we'll move on to detail, let's see.
I
Do we
think
have
now
four
we're
on
in
this
the
one?
overall policy.
So we're on the overall policy. I
Yes.
thought we had 4 for some reason. Oh, that is the overall one. The overall policy.
So the superintendent shall not cause or allow financial planning for any fiscal year or the remaining part of any fiscal years to deviate materially from the board's ends policy, risk financial jeopardy, or fail to be delivered from a multi-year plan, derived, from a multi-year plan. The interpretation, since the board has not specified priorities for its ends policy, I interpret the policy to mean that academic proficiency is the top priority and disposition for lifelong learning, personal development, and citizenship equally share second-level priority. I interpret risk financial jeopardy to mean a significant non-compliance with Executive Limitations Policy 2.4, financial conditions and activities. I interpret derive from a multi-year plan to mean that information used in decision-making for facilities maintenance, transportation, food service, enrollment, and teacher requirements, expenditures, and revenues are aligned with the 2020 plan, and our multi-tiered system of support includes projections and estimates of the expected state of affairs at least 3 years into the future. Martin? Oh, sorry, no, he was pointing to you.
Sorry, I'm so
I
sorry.
was just wondering if we're still aligning with the 2020 plan.
I'm not going to be able to, I'm not going to be able to answer
My
that one
question
as
is, what is the
clearly.
2020 plan? Like, that's not a term that I'm familiar
It was
with.
something, I don't know, 4 years ago, when 2020 seemed a very long time off. That there was a plan, so yeah.
Yeah.
I think that we've moved past the 2020.
Okay.
Because that was one of,
NTSS implementation,
okay.
so we're trying to go out further years, but.
Because that was my overall question is, on that big overall policy, fails to be derived from a multi-year plan. I feel like we always talk about how we have a multi-year stewardship plan, but I haven't, in the couple of years that I've been on the board, haven't really seen us have I've not been presented with, anyway, a multi-year financial projection or any kind of, I guess we have enrollment projections, but there hasn't really been sort of a multi-year actual budget or, operational plan that I've seen. So I had a question about that. The other thing, the beginning sentence of this, I found odd, the superintendent's interpretation. Since the board has not specified priorities for its ends policy, we haven't had a discussion about that. We haven't really been asked to do that. So I wasn't sure why he would interpret that. I didn't understand that there was sort of a rank order of or prioritization of our ends in any way.
I recall being part of these conversations that, I think you could easily just cross the beginning of that out and say, I interpret the policy to mean, because there wasn't a ranking. But I do recall when we first read the interpretation on here, David did want to choose to rank academic proficiency a little bit higher. And there wasn't a reason for the board to disagree with that at the time. So I think that's how it got phrased in here. But
Okay.
it wasn't really a robust board discussion on prioritizing the ends policy.
I think, this interpretation probably needs to be updated for that. But on the other point, before you were on the board, a few years ago, we were starting to press for a long-term operational financial plan. But then, I think soon after, master planning and visioning that whole process kind of took precedent over that. And I think as we get close to being finished with that, hopefully, at some point, that we can put that back to the top of the priority list. So, that's where yeah.
Your operational plan.
Yeah. But other things got in the way a little bit, I think, so. Well, I mean, in part because the master plan envisioning the result of all that, we anticipated that that would go into having a longer-term operational
Right.
financial plan, so.
Okay.
Put that on our agenda for next year.
We hope the state will join us in prioritizing a multi-year operational plan.
It's really hard to do when you have elections every 2 years. You don't know who's gonna be there making the,
Including term limits, then. Anything else on the overall policy? Any other
On
questions,
the
comments?
interpretation,
Oh.
just didn't know if we wanted to go, we didn't go through evidence.
Oh, I'm
Stopped
sorry, yeah, we
everybody
should go
before
through
we went
the
evidence.
individual evidence, yeah.
So I will admit that these ends things were not written by me, so I will read them if you want me to, or if you want to read them. And okay,
this needs to be updated.
Okay.
For instance, under personal development, the PACT is no longer in existence. So it just says to me that probably that evidence needs to be looked at again with fresh eyes.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I read this, I sort of, especially with B, C, D, and, B, C, and D, I really felt like it still reflects our lack of having ends metrics other than standardized tests, because even disposition for lifelong learning, we still sort of go back to, our other valuable resources, mostly faculty meeting and in-service time, are used to improve gathering and use of student performance and assessment data as a way to improve instruction, particularly towards the new standards as defined by the CCSS, which I'm assuming means Common Core State Standards, but it's, if you're fresh to it, maybe you wouldn't know that. But again, that feels like even in disposition for lifelong learning, we're going back to academic proficiency because it's the thing we can measure, and it still doesn't feel like we're kind of getting to, I worried as I read this, how do we know we're allocating resources appropriately to meet all of these ends? Because we just haven't figured out how to do it. And
And this hasn't really been mirrored up to even the last couple of years where we've
We've
been
worked on that. We're making
some
progress,
progress on
yeah.
it. But this is, yeah, it needs to be updated, I
Yeah.
think. For that reason as well.
So independent of David not being here this evening, we wouldn't be ready to take action on this regardless. So we will table this and put it on, if not the next agenda, future agenda with that feedback. And
Okay.
can we count on you, Joanne, to
I'll
provide
talk
it?
to him.
Great.
And when you're talking to
He's traveling with me to a conference, so.
The multi-year plan thing comes up again on the last page. So just to make sure that, I know we've kind of said all of it needs updating, but just to be clear specifically, that last number 3, multi-year planning, the district facility stewardship plan continues to serve as the basis of planning district operations? No, no, it doesn't. I hope not.
Are you right here? Okay, yeah.
On the last page 10.
This was an aspirational policy, Bridget, at the time.
But we're in compliance.
I am not sure that would make the cut in a future conversation. All right, thanks very much.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Amity.
Amity.
Good job.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 12, setting the agenda for the November 7th meeting. So we do have this item on again, so we'll continue to have that on. And anything else on here?
Yes, Elizabeth. I'd like to reserve 10 minutes for my report on the vaping talk that I will be attending the week before. That's all right with the board?
And I would like to, I guess I'd like to suggest that an update in announcements might be appropriate, but if there's some content related, I'm really wondering whether having a board member present content on an area is appropriate or not, or if it shouldn't be a recommendation, and I'm just thinking out loud here, but a recommendation for an expert in the area to present something, because we've really not had and I'll look to other board members, we've not had a lot of venues where board members report back substantive content from learnings. And I guess I'd just ask that question. I could certainly see a summary of the conference, but allocating, 10 minutes on our board agenda is fairly significant, particularly when it hasn't yet been prioritized as board action or board activity right now. So I'll just open that up for discussion.
I mean, I would want to look at, the board's role and where it would fit in. And, it possibly could fit in, I could see it fitting in if the objective at some point is to ask the legislature to do something about this. Because that's one of, within our bailiwick, is that we go to legislature for things that we think need to be done for education. If it's a matter of telling the administration to adopt a policy or whatnot, then it really should be them reporting to us, through the superintendent. So, I mean, it depends on what you're after for that. So that's kind of how I would perceive it. What's the goal for that? I mean, it could certainly, announcements, I think, can be broader and could be a place where you could explain what you've heard there.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I think my goal is to inform the board and to inform the administration. And I think, I guess I'm a little concerned that the administration has not approached the board and asked for help on this issue. I think they should be.
I guess in what sense?
They have not brought, I've been the one that brings up the subject, nobody in the administration has brought it up. I get the feeling some people agree with my position that it's pretty easy to figure out, but nobody has approached the board and asked for anything or at least said, look, we've got this problem here. Can we do anything about it?
So I guess the question is to understand from the administration whether we have the problem within our school, and we very well may or may not, and what they are doing about it. I mean, I think that's, if we have a concern, if the board has a concern over the health of our students, and this goes obviously to that point, we should hear from the administration of, is this a concern? What is happening? What are you doing? Rather than, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily our place to lecture to the administration, to tell them what they should be doing. We should, say, this is an issue, and tell us what's happening, tell us the policy. So that's one thing, that's on that side. If it's a matter that we want to go to the legislature and press them to increase the age to 21, if that's what we think is appropriate, I do think that's appropriate personally, but we have to talk about this as a board. I've in fact voted for that in the House. It's died in the Senate. So in any event, I mean, if that's what we're doing, I've talked about having a letter to the legislature in the December timeframe, and in that can be part of our urging for legislative action. But I don't know that a discussion about what you have learned and such is necessary for putting that together for a letter, because they're not going to watch us here. We need to get that information into the letter to the legislature. So I think because of your interest, and I think I'd like to hear from the administration as far as what is the policy, what is being done, what are they seeing as a problem within the school.
Is it part of any of the ends reports that already come to you in terms of safety of students, or?
No,
I'm
it's
just
not.
not familiar with all the reports that come to you.
Right.
Well, some of the ends reports includes the risk assessment survey.
Right,
And I believe the
right.
risk assessment survey identified vaping
Yes.
as in.
And we do
as-
have a tobacco policy, which
Yes.
vaping is part of that.
Correct.
Yeah, that was
So-
my understanding.
So there is some evidence that has come to the board through administration of feedback from students in terms of behavioral risk. I have not heard a specific recommendation of enhancing the tobacco policy or having a separate policy at this point. I don't know that it would be policy or procedure either at that, but I think Martin is correct, and maybe that's the thing I'm struggling a little bit with, Alex, is typically the board would not, would use community feedback to inform administration of maybe some emerging concerns and ask for feedback. It might be a case of, you know, if we want to become active in, like you said, in influencing the legislature, it would be in that example. So it's not been the reverse situation where we're telling administration to make something.
Right. I don't think this is at the point where we're telling the administration to do something different or to do something that they aren't doing. I think it's a matter of asking the administration for feedback on this. Although, you know, up till now, the administration's been pretty silent on it. But we haven't asked about it.
Right.
I have, but, I mean, the board as a group has not.
I do think there's probably some information that's part of what's already reported, so I'll talk with David about which one of the reports comes to you that's around student safety, and if we don't have information around tobacco use in that, then that's something we can look at, what information we have on that.
So I don't believe that I think in the past, we've generally had a report to us, in part for the public as well, about the youth risk behavior survey.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if we should actually find a place in the agenda to have it a little bit broader. We can certainly make sure that this concern is addressed, but I know in the past that we've had a presentation that this is what we're seeing, and I think we're probably due for that as well, and I would imagine that the youth risk behavior survey for last year must,
What's
you
the
know.
It's
time?
out.
You recall the timing of?
I don't know
That
when it
release.
comes into us, to be honest, no.
I
Yeah,
believe
I
it came out in the past 2 months.
Yeah, I think it has come out, but
Has it?
but if we
Okay.
could,
So.
So you want it as a separate agenda item, not as part of a report to you about student safety? Is that what you're asking for? I just want to get
I mean,
clear.
well, we'd have to look and see in what context, and asking David in what
Okay.
context. It may have been just part of the superintendent's report, just
Yeah.
for informing us and the public, you know, through this board meeting about what is happening within our school.
Yep.
It may have, I just don't recall.
Okay.
It's been a little while.
Okay,
So Alex, would it meet, I'd really like to give David the opportunity to sort of respond with how he would want to frame this concern that's been expressed. And,
Okay.
And it's in the context of a recommendation that the board either, propose specific legislative activity. Would it address your concern to sort of, give a brief update during announcements around the conference that you attended? I don't know if it's being referred to as a conference or.
It's
But,
an educational workshop, or it's called the Community Education Series. So,
so if there's an appropriate, I think, response might be if there was a handout, you could send that ahead of time to be distributed to the board. You could send it ahead of time to David, and Joanne, if you can share that there's an interest in getting administration's feedback in the broader context, but inclusive of this particular issue. And then if you want to take some time and announcements, just to say you did attend and kind of this is what your experience was.
all right. I will do that. I think having it in the announcements will be all right. I will bring the handouts for the board and for the administration as well, and I'll try to touch on all the main points of what is discussed there. And thank you.
Does that feel comfortable to the board?
Fine with me.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And I do want to clarify, I don't believe that we have a problem with our policy. I know there's the tobacco prohibition. If the policy is being interpreted such as that, well, vaping is not tobacco, so it doesn't count under this policy, and it's okay for the kids to have it, that would be a problem. I know that the Southwest Supervisory Union was going to visit the issue because they felt that their policy prohibited tobacco but did not prohibit vaping. I think it's pretty.
I think ours has been updated with the vaping, but I can check
Yeah.
into that for you.
I mean, it's a tobacco product, so I don't think it's, I don't think it's a problem, and I know Mike left, but he did ask me the question about that, is, are byproducts, or whatever you want to call them, of tobacco prohibited under our policies as well? And I believe they are,
Yeah.
and I believe it's applied that way as well.
Noah, did you have a comment?
They're definitely prohibited.
All right, now we have to put it into effect, or put it in,
They're harder to find, but they're prohibited.
yeah.
Yeah, they're tricky.
They're very tricky.
Okay. Anything else for November 7th? Anything we should delete off this agenda that is no
David had
longer-
wanted to add something about the board direction for the budget.
A separate agenda item? Okay. Did he have a suggestion where that would be?
He had it near the, I just wrote it on here. Probably near the budget book. I don't know.
Okay, maybe make it 8A, we'll renumber that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or it could just be a general, we generally, around that time, start to have a regular budget,
Yeah.
update.
I think he just wants some direction from you about what
Agenda
you're
items.
expecting us
Yeah.
to put together for the budget.
Yeah, we usually, the truth is, one thing I would kind of like to see that we do normally see around now is a calendar for what the key dates are in the budget process. The truth is, I'm gonna have to talk to you about that in the next couple of days, because Steve and I are on the hook to write an article for the other paper that's due a week from tomorrow, that sort of outlines what our planning process looks like, and I have sort of, vague outline from previous experience, but it would be good if we could start to think about that. And so it might just be good to have a budget, update, or budget planning
Yep.
update, and have the bullet points of, the budget book redesign,
a good idea.
Yeah,
the
okay.
calendar, and then the board direction,
So be-
as they get, as you.
9A, B, C, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
And again, it's a small one, but Steve and I will, by that point, have had our wonderful article published, and so it will be time to talk again, just to remind everyone, other paper articles, I don't think is on
Yeah,
this
so
agenda.
we'll need
to
an
add
other
that.
paper article agenda, which we could put after 12, I guess.
I don't know if we want anything, update from the VSBA. We will have been, the three of us will have been to VSBA. I don't know if there's anything, we can just put that in announcements or something maybe, but.
Well, I think we should have either the next meeting or the second meeting in November, talk about what we want to ask of the legislature. And that does kind of follow on somewhat from what we learned in the next 2 days from the VSBA, or at least tomorrow afternoon, as far as what issues we want to weigh in on. And I don't know if we want to put it on to give enough time to put together the letter and enough time for us to review it. We probably should have it on the next meeting, because I know our second meeting in November is not till late in November.
Yeah, that
Which is
one's-
probably when we
this
want
one's
to
getting a little
finalize
tight.
it, just to get it in front of legislators before the session starts.
Right, so why don't we'll add, David may need to streamline this one a little bit, but we'll add kind of legislative priorities, is that the right
Yeah.
title?
Yes, yeah.
I hope between Meg and Joanne, you have all these notes.
Which
We'll
that,
compare later, Meg.
which that and the future agenda items takes off the draft letter to legislature in December. We can take that off there if we're going to have this on
Okay.
the agenda for,
Great. Okay, anything else? Sounds like that's a pretty robust meeting. All right, we'll move on to, we've already addressed one of the future agenda items on agenda item 13. Anything else we want to add or delete? All right, seeing none.
Draft
Oh,
a letter to the legislature regarding.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
I just said we'd move that one off. So
Done.
maybe for a placeholder, put here the youth risk behavior survey, if we're not putting it on the agenda for next time. That will keep a placeholder for it.
Yeah, and tools for transparency on future agenda items really is meant to basically make the budget planning process clearer and the budget book clearer with, changing what the reports look like and that kind of thing. That's already really being covered under our budget book redesign, so I think that can probably.
So we took 2 off and added 1. That's a good ratio.
Good.
All right. All right, consider the minutes of the meetings of October 1st, 3rd, and October 8th. Any changes on the October 1st meeting?
Nope.
All right, seeing none, those are approved. Anything on the October 3rd meeting?
I had nothing.
Seeing none, those are approved. And the October 8th meeting?
Nope.
I'm seeing none, those are approved. Any comments or questions on AP orders, agenda item 15, AP orders 13 and 14? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 16. This is action required in an AP order check to Belkate in the amount of $50,042.90. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And we're
Hope you were
adjourned.
ready.